Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Kayla Cato-Piersaint, and as mentioned before, I work in the Educational and Community Programs Department, specifically Educational Leadership, where we support those who want to become superintendents, school board leaders, school district leaders, and I also teach in the Africana Studies program as well as the College Now and SEEK program. I read a blog post that said that when we introduce ourselves to new people, we tend to measure ourselves by what we do. So in addition to that, I have been playing the piano since I was 5. I've played in many recital halls in New York City. I love to travel, and as most women, I love to shop. So from classroom to community, integrating academic concepts with cultural community context, and you will see why it is jazz themed in a bit. So I was a part of this faculty fellowship in the fall time where we learned about the pedagogy of community engaged learning. So what is community engaged learning? It is defined as an educational approach that integrates academic learning with community-based experiences to foster active citizenship, social responsibility, and civic engagement. So in community engaged learning, students engage in collaborative partnerships with community-based organizations to address real-world issues, apply classroom knowledge to practical contexts, and make meaningful contributions to a community. So in this table here, you see that it is for high impact practices, and at the very bottom, it says service learning and community-based learning, which is what I did, and it is to engage students in field-based applied learning with community partners. So for my class, we partnered with the Louis Armstrong Museum in Corona, Queens. And the first bullet point says to address the needs of the partner. So the reason why I italicized that is because the facilitators of this fellowship emphasized that when you were doing community engaged learning, you were to meet the need of the community organization. And I think that a lot of times when we think of like helping out a community organization, we're thinking of laborious or mundane work. But my students, they were able to interview an artist, and their interviews are actually going to add to the personal archives of the Louis Armstrong Museum, which I found to be very unique. So first is addressing the needs of the partner, and the needs of this partner in this instance was to add to their archival collections. The second one is to align on missions, values, goals, and outcomes. The third one is to maintain open and ongoing communication. So I had to have many meetings with the Louis Armstrong Museum, the stakeholders, as well as the directors of this museum, just to make sure that our needs as a class is being met, but their needs as an organization was being met as well. And then seek regular feedback from stakeholders. And knowing that Queens College holds a personal relationship with the Louis Armstrong Museum, we wanted to make sure that we were respectful of this relationship as well as this partnership. And so I had to, just regularly communicate with them, have meetings with them to ensure that all parties were respected. It's a bit hard to see here, but this is a rubric that teaches you how to tailor your syllabus of a course that is involved in community engaged learning. So first, it'll evaluate your partnership. R stands for reflection. E stands for engagement, the ways that you engage with a community partner. L stands for logistics. So for example, in my syllabus, I made sure to let the students know that when we go to the museum and you interview the artist, you are to be dressed, professionally dressed, respectful. So I made sure to put that in my syllabus. O is for objectives. So I had to change my course objectives to amplify the mission of the community as well as my own course. A is for assessments, and we'll talk about assessments in a little bit. And then D was for the definition of service learning, aka community engaged learning. And I took the snapshot from my syllabus. So what we did was we took the original definition of community engaged learning, and then we compared it with Queens College motto, and then so we made the community engaged learning definition to fit the mission and the motto of Queens College. This will also be in the digital toolkit. If you ever decide to teach a community engaged learning course, you can take exactly from my syllabus if you wish. And these are reflection questions specifically from Elon University that gives you questions on how to approach the community engaged learning project So you have pre-service learning questions. My students, they were in groups and they discussed these questions with one another. And then before we went to the museum, they answered these questions individually. While they were at the museum, they interviewed the artist, took notes on the artist, as well as the during service learning questions. And then once we left the museum for homework, they had to answer the post-reflection questions. Now, I put these questions in a Google Drive so that they can work on these questions throughout the whole semester. I introduced this to them in January, and we visited the museum in April. So throughout the entire semester, we were going back and forth. And I put it in a Google Drive so that as they respond to the questions, I'm responding to them. So it's more so an informal kind of reflection, and it also made it very personal to them. So here's the artist that we interviewed, is Catherine Russell. She celebrated the life of Lil Hardin, which was Louis Armstrong's second wife. And if you didn't know, Lil Hardin is actually the one who got Louis Armstrong to where he was. And the reason why we know who Louis Armstrong today is because of his second wife, Lil Hardin. So here are pictures of my students interviewing Catherine Russell after the show, and then, like I said before, these pictures, their interviews will all be in the Louis Armstrong archives. Unfortunately, their project is not due for another 2 weeks, so I do not have examples of that, but they are supposed to do a multimedia project where they're going to include their time at the museum, videos, pictures, their reflection questions as a report write-up, and their interview with the artist. And then lastly, for assessing course and project outcomes, you can do it with academic content knowledge assessments. I have put these in the toolkit, class surveys, reflections, and evaluations. So at the end, I asked the students, what community needs did the project fulfill? So how did you aid the Louis Armstrong Museum? And what changes would you suggest to improve the project? So in any way that I choose to do it another semester, I have their feedback. And then I asked these questions to the Louis Armstrong stakeholders. How successful was the experience in meeting the agreed upon goals and expectations that we talked about in the beginning of the semester? And then what aspects of the partnership could be done differently in the future so that I know for future use? That is it. Thank you.